Robert Chen had been an electrician for 23 years, and he'd learned to trust his instincts about buildings. When something felt wrong, it usually was wrong. And right now, standing in the basement of the Carnegie Public Library, running his hands across a section of wall that sounded hollow when he tapped it, every instinct told him something was very wrong. "Marcus, hand me the thermal camera," Robert said to his assistant, Marcus Webb. They'd been working on the library's electrical renovation for 3 weeks now, updating wiring that hadn't been touched since the 1940s. Most of the work had been straightforward, tedious but simple, until they reached this back corner of the book storage room. Marcus passed him the thermal imaging device. Robert scanned the wall slowly, watching the heat signature display on the small screen. The rest of the basement showed consistent temperature readings throughout, but this section, about 8 feet wide and 7 feet tall, showed something completely different. "There's empty space behind here," Robert said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet basement. The library had closed an hour ago, and they were alone in the building, like a room or a closet that's been sealed off. "Maybe an old coal room?" Marcus suggested, moving closer to examine the wall. "This building's from 1904, right? They probably sealed off a bunch of stuff when they converted to modern heating." "Maybe," Robert said. But his instincts were screaming at him. The mortar on this section was different. Newer. Not from 1904. Someone had rebuilt this wall, probably decades ago, but definitely not when the building was first constructed. What Robert didn't know, what nobody in Cedar Falls knew in that moment, was that he was about to solve a mystery that had haunted the entire town for 36 years. A mystery that began on a Friday night in October 1987, when a dedicated librarian named Margaret Walsh stayed late to finish inventory and stumbled onto something she was never supposed to see. The discovery Robert was about to make would expose corruption, bring justice, and finally give answers to a daughter who'd spent more than half her life wondering what happened to her mother. But first, he had to trust his instincts and look behind that wall. "Should we open it up?" Marcus asked. "Just make a small hole and see what's inside." Robert checked his watch. It was 5:15 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. Jennifer Martinez, the library director, had already left for the day. They could wait until Monday, file a report, let the city decide what to do about this mysterious sealed room. That would be the safe choice, the professional choice. But Robert's curiosity was too strong, and something about this wall bothered him deeply, the way it had been concealed. The way someone had gone to such effort to make it blend in with the rest of the basement. It felt deliberate. It felt like hiding something. "Let's take a quick look," Robert decided. "If it's nothing, just an old utility space, we'll patch it back up and nobody needs to know. If it's something concerning, we'll report it first thing Monday morning." Marcus nodded and headed back to their truck to retrieve a sledgehammer and some other tools. While he was gone, Robert stood alone in the basement, staring at the wall. The single overhead bulb cast weak light across the space, creating shadows that seemed to move in the corners of his vision. The Carnegie Public Library was beautiful from the outside. Classic early 20th century architecture, built with Andrew Carnegie's philanthropic funding to bring knowledge and culture to small-town Iowa. But down here in the basement, it felt different. Older, like the building was holding secrets in its foundation. Robert had worked in a lot of old buildings over his career. He'd seen his share of strange things, abandoned rooms, forgotten storage spaces, even the occasional piece of vintage equipment that nobody remembered installing. But this felt different somehow. This felt important. Marcus returned with the sledgehammer. "Ready?" "Gentle," Robert cautioned. "Just enough to make a small hole. We don't want to bring down the whole wall." Marcus positioned himself and took the first swing. The sledgehammer connected with the wall, and mortar cracked. Dust puffed into the air. The second swing created a small opening, maybe 6 inches across. Immediately, air rushed out of the hole. Cool air. Stale. Undisturbed for a very long time. And with it came a smell that made Robert's stomach turn. dust, mold, decay, and something else, something organic that had been sealed away for decades. "Oh man," Marcus said, backing away from the wall. "That smell. What is that?" Robert pulled out his flashlight, a heavy-duty lead model that he always kept in his tool belt. He approached the hole carefully and shined the light through the opening. At first, he could see nothing but darkness and empty space. The beam of his flashlight cut through the stale air, illuminating dust particles that hung suspended like snow in the confined area. The room, because it was definitely a room, not just a utility space, was small, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, completely sealed off from the rest of the basement. Then Robert's light caught something on the floor. Fabric, dark fabric. What looked like clothing, a skirt maybe, and a sweater or cardigan of some kind. The colors were faded, covered in decades of dust, but the shapes were unmistakable. And inside those clothes, visible where the fabric had collapsed, were bones. Human bones. Robert's hand trembled, causing the flashlight beam to shake. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and moved the light slowly across the scene. A skeleton, still clothed, lay partially collapsed against the far wall of the sealed room. Near the skull, he could see what looked like glasses, one lens shattered, the frames bent. And next to the skeleton, barely visible under a layer of dust, was something rectangular. "Marcus," Robert said quietly, his voice not quite steady. "Call 911, right now." "What? Why? What do you see?" "Just call them. Tell them we found human remains in the library basement. Tell them not to touch anything. Tell them we're coming upstairs and we'll wait for them there." Marcus fumbled for his phone, hands shaking as the reality of what Robert had said sank in. While Marcus made the call, Robert kept his light trained on the scene behind the wall. His mind was racing, trying to process what he was seeing. Someone had died in that room. That much was obvious. But how? When? And why had they been sealed behind a wall in a public library basement? Robert forced himself to look at the details, to observe like he'd been trained to do in his years of construction work. The position of the skeleton suggested the person had been conscious when they were sealed inside. The body was slumped against the wall, not lying flat as if they'd been placed there after death. One of the skeletal hands was positioned higher up on the wall, as if reaching toward something. And when Robert moved his flashlight to that area of the wall, he saw marks, faint but visible. Marks where someone had desperately tried to escape. His stomach lurched. This wasn't just a death. This was someone who'd been trapped. Someone who died slowly, terribly, in this sealed room with no way out. "They're coming," Marcus said behind him, his voice shaking. "Police, fire department, medical examiner. They said 10 minutes. Should we wait upstairs?" "Yeah," Robert said, finally pulling his light away from the scene. "Let's get out of this basement." They climbed the stairs together, both men shaken by what they'd discovered. Neither of them spoke as they walked through the library's main floor and out into the late afternoon sunshine. After the darkness of the basement, the brightness felt almost surreal. The spring day was beautiful, warm. The University of Northern Iowa campus was visible across the street, students walking between classes, completely unaware that a 36-year-old mystery was being solved just a few hundred feet away. Cars passed on the street. People went about their normal Friday afternoon routines. But Robert couldn't stop thinking about that skeleton in the sealed room, about the marks on the wall, about the clipboard lying in the dust. Someone had died down there, and nobody had known. Nobody had found them. For how long? Years? Decades? The first police car arrived 9 minutes after Marcus's call. Then, another. Then, an ambulance. Then, a fire truck. Within 20 minutes, the Carnegie Public Library was surrounded by emergency vehicles, their lights painting the old stone building in alternating red and blue. Detective Sarah Williams arrived 30 minutes after the initial call. She was in her early 50s, with short gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen a lot over her 27 years with the Cedar Falls Police Department. She'd been working a different case when the call came through about human remains discovered at the library, but something made her respond personally to this one. Maybe it was the location, the Carnegie Library, a landmark in Cedar Falls. Maybe it was the unusual circumstances, remains sealed behind a wall. Or maybe it was something deeper, an instinct, like Robert's instinct about that wall, that this was going to be important. Robert and Marcus gave their statements to the first responding officers, explaining exactly what they'd found and how. Then, Detective Williams interviewed them separately, asking detailed questions about the wall, the sealed room, everything they'd observed. The mortar was newer. Robert explained. Different color, different texture from the rest of the foundation. I'd estimate it was done sometime in the 1980s or 90s based on the materials and the way it had weathered. Williams made notes. And you said there was a clipboard near the remains. Yes. I didn't touch it, obviously, but it was right there, next to the body. Or the skeleton, I mean. Anything else? Any other objects visible in the room? Robert thought carefully. The person, whoever it was wearing glasses. They'd fallen off, but they were right there near the skull. And they were dressed. A skirt, I think. And a cardigan, or sweater. Dark colors, but hard to tell exact shades because of all the dust. A skirt and cardigan. Professional clothing. Williams felt something click in her mind. She'd been a junior detective in the 1990s, just starting out, when she'd worked on a missing persons case that had never been solved. A librarian who'd vanished without a trace in October 1987. Margaret Walsh. Williams had inherited that cold case file. When she'd moved to the detective division, she'd reviewed it dozens of times over the years. Margaret Walsh, age 43, head librarian at the Carnegie Public Library, last seen by her assistant on the evening of October 23, 1987. Her car had been found in the library parking lot the next morning. Her purse in her office. No signs of struggle, no clues, no body. For 36 years, that case had haunted Williams. She'd interviewed Margaret's daughter, Sarah, multiple times over the years. Watched the young woman age from a college student in her 20s to a middle-aged woman in her 50s, always carrying the burden of not knowing what had happened to her mother. Could this be Margaret Walsh? After all these years, could she have been here the whole time? Sealed in the basement of her own workplace. I need to get down there, Williams said to the officer managing the scene. But first, I need to make a call. She walked back to her car and pulled out her phone. In her contacts, she still had Sarah Walsh's number. They'd stayed in touch over the years, Williams calling periodically with updates, though there never really were any updates. Just assurances that the case was still open, still being worked when leads came in. The phone rang 3 times before Sarah answered. Hello? Sarah, this is Detective Williams from Cedar Falls Police. I need you to sit down for a moment. There was a pause. Then Sarah's voice came back, tight with sudden fear. What's happened? Did you find something? We don't know yet for certain, but workmen were doing renovations at the Carnegie Library today. They found a sealed room in the basement, and there are human remains inside. Sarah was silent. Williams could hear her breathing, could imagine her processing this information. It's her, isn't it? Sarah finally whispered. It's my mother. We don't know that yet. We'll need forensic analysis, dental records, DNA testing. But given the location, given the circumstances, Williams paused. I think you should come to Cedar Falls. I think you should be here. I'm in Colorado. I can catch a flight tonight. I'll be there tomorrow. Sarah, I need you to prepare yourself. If this is your mother, the circumstances, they're not good. The person in that room didn't die quickly. They were trapped. Another silence. Then, you mean she was alive when someone sealed her in there? Williams closed her eyes. We believe so. Yes. She heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath. Then, crying, quiet, at first, then building. 36 years of grief and uncertainty and desperate hope finally breaking through. "I'm so sorry," Williams said. "I'm so sorry it took this long, but if this is your mother, we're going to find out what happened. We're going to find out who did this. I promise you that." "I'll be there tomorrow," Sarah managed. "First flight I can get." After the call ended, Williams sat in her car for a moment, gathering herself. Then she got out and walked toward the library entrance where the forensic team was suiting up to enter the basement. "Detective." One of the forensic technicians approached her. "We're ready to go in. Chief wants to know if you're coming down." "Absolutely," Williams said. "This is my case." The basement felt different now, with all the equipment and people. Bright LED work lights had been set up, banishing the shadows that had hidden the sealed room for so long. The forensic photographer was already documenting everything, camera flashing as she recorded every angle. Williams approached the wall where Robert had made his discovery. The hole was still small. The forensic team hadn't enlarged it yet, waiting to document everything first. She pulled on protective gloves and took the flashlight that one of the techs offered her. She shined the light through the opening, seeing what Robert had seen: the small room. The skeleton clothed in dark, dust-covered fabric, the shattered glasses, the clipboard lying in the dust like a message waiting to be read. "We need to open this up carefully," Williams said to the team lead. "Document everything, photograph everything, but we need to see what's on that clipboard, and we need to process this entire room as a crime scene." "You think it's a homicide?" the team lead asked. "I think someone was sealed in that room while they were still alive," Williams replied. "Whether that makes it murder, manslaughter, or something else, that's what we need to find out." The careful work of opening the wall took another hour. The forensic team removed the mortar and bricks, slowly, methodically, documenting every step. When the opening was finally large enough for someone to enter, Williams was the first one through. The smell was overwhelming inside the small space, decay and dust and stale air that hadn't circulated in decades. Williams breathed through her mouth and approached the remains carefully, her feet making tracks in the thick dust on the floor. Up close, the reality of what had happened here was even more terrible. The skeleton showed signs of trauma. The skull had a visible fracture above the right temple, but the position of the body told an even more terrible story. This person had been conscious, had tried to escape. The marks on the wall were everywhere, concentrated around where a door must have once been before it was sealed. Williams looked at the clothing. Professional. A dark skirt, now faded and covered in dust. A cardigan that might have been burgundy or brown once. Sensible shoes. The kind of outfit a librarian would wear. Near the wall, Williams saw something else. The skeletal fingers of one hand showed signs of trauma from repeated attempts to escape. "God," Williams whispered. "How long did you survive in here?" The medical examiner would be able to tell them more, but Williams knew enough about physiology to know that a person sealed in a room this size, with no ventilation, would last maybe 3 to 5 days before lack of oxygen and dehydration killed them. 3 to 5 days of terror, of calling for help, of desperate attempts to escape. But it was the clipboard that Williams focused on next. It lay near the body, covered in dust but clearly visible. She carefully picked it up, brushing away some of the dust to see what was written on the paper attached to it. The handwriting was shaky, some words barely legible, but the message was clear. Whitmore, Brennan, Richardson, Winters. 4 names. Written in desperate, trembling handwriting. Briefcase, money, corruption. 3 more words, explaining what had led to this. And then, at the bottom of the page, in larger letters as if the person had used the last of their strength to write it. "Sarah, I love you. Not your fault. I love you." Williams felt tears sting her eyes. A mother's final message to her daughter, Margaret Walsh, because this had to be Margaret, There was no other explanation. Had used her dying strength to leave evidence and to tell her daughter she loved her. Detective? One of the forensic techs called from outside the room. We found something else. Another section of wall that sounds hollow, further back in the basement. Williams carefully set the clipboard down and made her way out of the sealed room. The tech led her to another area of the basement, behind some old wooden shelving units. Here, the tech said, tapping on the wall. It sounded hollow, different from the solid concrete around it. They pulled the shelving away from the wall and found it, a false panel, crude but effective. Behind it was a small space, and wedged into that space was a brown leather briefcase. Williams pulled it out carefully. It was dusty but intact. The latches weren't locked. She pressed them, and they clicked open easily. Inside was exactly what Margaret Walsh's note had indicated. Bundles of cash, now dated and musty but still intact. Photographs of the library, of city officials, of properties around Cedar Falls, and most importantly, documents, property transfer records, bank statements showing large deposits, ledgers listing payments to various officials. A complete record of what appeared to be a massive corruption scheme. "We need to document all of this," Williams said. "Every page, every photograph. This is evidence not just of Margaret Walsh's murder, but of the reason she was killed." The forensic team worked through the night, carefully photographing and cataloging everything. The remains would be transported to the medical examiner's office for formal identification and analysis. The briefcase contents would be processed as evidence. Every detail of the sealed room would be measured, photographed, and analyzed. By morning, Detective Williams had a clear picture of what had happened 36 years ago. Margaret Walsh had discovered the briefcase during her evening inventory. She'd opened it and seen the evidence of corruption involving some of the most powerful people in Cedar Falls, and someone had caught her with that evidence. What followed had been a tragedy, a confrontation, an injury, and the terrible decision by someone to seal an injured woman in a basement room and let her die rather than face the consequences of the corruption being exposed. Now, 36 years later, the truth was finally coming to light, and Williams was determined to make sure that everyone responsible would face justice, even if some of them were already dead. Sarah Walsh arrived in Cedar Falls the next morning on the first flight from Denver. Williams met her at the small municipal airport and drove her directly to the police station. "The medical examiner is doing the formal identification now," Williams explained. As they walked into the building, dental records, DNA analysis. But based on the evidence we found, the clipboard message, the location, the timeline, "I'm confident it's your mother." Sarah nodded, her face pale but composed. "Tell me everything. I need to know what happened to her." They sat in Williams' office, and the detective laid out everything they'd discovered. The sealed room, the briefcase full of evidence, the corruption scheme, Margaret's final message. When Williams showed Sarah the photograph of the clipboard, Sarah broke down completely. Her mother's last words, preserved for 36 years, finally reaching her. "She knew I'd blame myself," Sarah whispered through her tears. "Even then, dying alone in the dark, she was thinking about me, trying to protect me from guilt." "Your mother was remarkable," Williams said gently. "She was injured, terrified, trapped, but she had the presence of mind to write down the names of the people responsible. She made sure we'd have evidence. She made sure there would be justice." "Who were they?" Sarah asked, her voice hardening. "These people she named: Whitmore, Brennan, Richardson, Winters. Who are they?" "That's what we're working on now." All four were city officials in 1987. Mayor Thomas Brennan died in 1995. Councilmember David Richardson died in 2001. Judge Harold Winters died in 2010. And Whitmore. James Whitmore was the deputy mayor in 1987. He left Cedar Falls in January 1988, 3 months after your mother disappeared, moved to Arizona, built a successful real estate development company. He's 71 years old now, living in Scottsdale. So he's still alive, Sarah said. The one person who can tell us exactly what happened, and he's still alive. We're preparing to interview him, Williams confirmed. I'm flying to Arizona tomorrow with my partner. We have enough evidence to bring him in for questioning. The briefcase, your mother's note, the circumstances of the sealed room, it all points to a cover-up of the corruption scheme, and I have reason to believe Whitmore was directly involved. How? Williams pulled out another document from her file. I've been digging into the case files from 1987, looking for anything that might have been missed. And I found building permits for the Carnegie Library dated November 1987, 1 month after your mother disappeared. Emergency repair work in the basement. Guess who signed off on those permits as deputy mayor? Whitmore, Sarah said. And guess whose company did the work? Henderson Construction, owned by Thomas Henderson, who was the library's facilities manager in 1987. So Henderson sealed my mother in that room. Possibly. Or he sealed the room after your mother was already gone. We don't know yet. But Henderson died in 1998. However, his widow is still alive. Carolyn Henderson, 79 years old, living in a nursing home here in Cedar Falls. Have you talked to her? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first, but that's my next step. Sarah stood up, her face set with determination. I want to be there when you interview her. And I want to be there when you question Whitmore. Sarah, I understand your feelings, but my mother spent days dying in that basement, Sarah interrupted. Alone, scared, hurt. She wrote my name with the last of her strength. The least I can do is be there when we get answers about who did this to her. Williams considered for a moment, then nodded. I'll see what I can arrange. You can't be in the interrogation room, but you can watch through the observation window. Fair enough? Fair enough. 2 hours later, Williams and her partner Frank Morrison sat across from Carolyn Henderson in her room at Meadowview Assisted Living. The old woman looked frail, but her eyes were sharp and clear. Mrs. Henderson, Williams began, we need to ask you some questions about your late husband, Thomas Henderson. Tom's been gone for 25 years, Carolyn said. What could you possibly need to know? We need to know about his work at the Carnegie Public Library in October and November of 1987. Carolyn's expression changed immediately. A flash of something fear, guilt, recognition, crossed her face. Specifically, we need to know about emergency basement repairs he did in November 1987. I don't remember. Mrs. Henderson, Williams interrupted gently. We found Margaret Walsh yesterday. She was sealed behind a wall in the library basement. We know your husband did construction work there right after she disappeared. We need to know what he knew about what happened to her. Carolyn was silent for a long moment. Then tears began to roll down her weathered cheeks. Tom never forgave himself, she whispered. It aided him for the rest of his life. What did he know? He saw someone at the library that night, the night Margaret disappeared. Tom had gone back to check on a heating issue around 9:30. When he got there, he saw a car in the parking lot, a black Lincoln, and he saw someone entering the library through the side door. Who? James Whitmore, the deputy mayor. Morrison leaned forward. What did your husband do? Nothing. He left. Went home, didn't check on the heating system. He was scared. Whitmore was powerful. Connected. Tom didn't think it was his place to question why the deputy mayor was at the library after hours. But then Margaret was reported missing. Williams prompted. Yes. And about a week later, Whitmore came to our house, late at night. Tom was terrified. I'd never seen him like that. Carolyn's voice shook with the memory. Whitmore told Tom to forget what he'd seen, said it would be better for everyone. Better for our family. Tom asked, what happened to Margaret? Whitmore just said she wasn't coming back, that she'd left town. Did Tom believe him? No, but he was scared. And then Whitmore offered him money, a lot of money. $50,000 to do some emergency basement repairs at the library, and to keep his mouth shut about seeing Whitmore there that night. "So your husband sealed that room," Morrison said. "He didn't know." Carolyn's voice rose. "Tom thought he was just covering up something inappropriate. He didn't know there was someone back there. He didn't know Margaret was gone. Whitmore told him it was about covering up financial irregularities, making some documents disappear. Tom thought he was just hiding paperwork, not a person." When did he find out the truth? Years later. The guilt was eating at him. He'd taken the money, done the work, kept quiet about seeing Whitmore. But Margaret never came home. Her daughter kept looking, and Tom started to realize what he'd been part of. He tried to tell me, tried to confess, but the words wouldn't come. It destroyed him. The drinking got worse. His health deteriorated. When he died in 1998, part of me thought it was relief. Relief from carrying that awful secret. Did he ever write anything down? Any documentation of what Whitmore told him? Carolyn shook her head. No, he was too scared. Even years later, he was scared of what would happen if he talked. After leaving the nursing home, Williams and Morrison returned to the station to prepare for their trip to Arizona. They now had a witness, placing Whitmore at the library the night Margaret disappeared. They had evidence of him authorizing suspicious construction work shortly after, and they had the briefcase full of documentation showing his involvement in a major corruption scheme. It was time to confront James Whitmore. The next morning, Williams and Morrison flew to Phoenix and drove to Scottsdale. They'd coordinated with the Scottsdale Police Department, who picked up Whitmore at his estate and brought him to the station for questioning. Whitmore looked every bit the successful businessman. Tanned, fit for his age, expensive suit, confident demeanor. He was accompanied by a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman who'd already advised him to say nothing. "Mr. Whitmore," Williams began, sitting across from him in the interrogation room, "do you know why you're here?" "I have no idea," Whitmore replied smoothly. Williams placed a photograph of Margaret Walsh on the table. "Do you remember this woman?" Whitmore glanced at it briefly. "No." "Margaret Walsh, librarian at the Carnegie Public Library in Cedar Falls, Iowa, disappeared on October 23, 1987. You were deputy mayor at the time. I don't remember everyone who lived in Cedar Falls 36 years ago. But you remember October 1987, Morrison said. Because that's when you left Cedar Falls, January 1988. To be exact, 3 months after Margaret Walsh disappeared, you moved to Arizona and started a real estate development company. Built quite a fortune. That was a career opportunity. Nothing suspicious about it. Williams spread the contents of the briefcase across the table. The documents, the photographs, the bank statements. We found this hidden in the Carnegie Library basement. It contains evidence of a corruption scheme involving you and 3 other city officials. Your name appears on dozens of these documents. Whitmore stared at the documents, his confident expression finally cracking slightly. We also found this, Williams continued, placing the photograph of the clipboard on the table. Margaret's message, enlarged so every word was visible. Margaret Walsh wrote this as she was dying, sealed in a room in the library basement where she'd been trapped for days. She wrote your name, Mr. Whitmore. The color drained from Whitmore's face. His hands resting on the table began to tremble slightly. And we have a witness, Morrison added. Someone who saw you entering the library after hours on October 23, 1987, the night Margaret disappeared. Whitmore's lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear, but Whitmore wasn't listening. He was staring at the photograph of Margaret's final message, at her shaky handwriting, at the words she'd written to her daughter. "James, don't say anything," the lawyer warned. But something had broken in Whitmore. His shoulders sagged. When he looked up at Williams, there were tears in his eyes. "I didn't mean for her to die," he said quietly. "James," the lawyer said sharply. 36 years. Whitmore continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I've lived with this for 36 years. Every day, every night. Do you know what that's like? Then tell us what happened, William said gently. Tell us the truth. It's time. Whitmore took a shaky breath, ignoring his lawyer's protests, and then he told them everything. The corruption scheme had been going on for 2 years. Property purchases based on insider knowledge of development plans. Zoning approvals that made those properties valuable. Federal funds redirected. Building inspections falsified. It had netted over $50 million for the group of officials involved. The briefcase was Whitmore's insurance policy. Documentation of everything. Everyone involved. Proof that if anyone tried to betray him, he could take them all down. He'd hidden it in the library basement because he thought no one would ever look there. But Margaret Walsh had found it on October 23, 1987, during her evening inventory. She wasn't supposed to be there, Whitmore said. I'd checked the schedule. Everyone should have been gone by 9. But when I arrived to move the briefcase to a different location, the lights were on in the basement. She was there, and she'd opened it. She'd seen everything. What did you do? Williams asked. I tried to reason with her. Tried to explain that this was bigger than she understood. That powerful people were involved. People at the state level, even federal level. People who wouldn't hesitate to hurt her or her family if this came out. But she wouldn't listen. She said she had to report it. She tried to run, to get to a phone. So you stopped her. We had a confrontation. I just wanted to get the briefcase and leave, but she fought back. There was a struggle. She fell, hit her head on something. The card catalog. The injury was severe. She was barely conscious. And then, you sealed her in the basement. Whitmore's face crumpled. She was badly hurt. The head injury was severe. I thought she wouldn't survive long, that it would be over quickly. If I called for help, if anyone found out I'd been there, the whole scheme would unravel. $50 million. Dozens of people implicated. Some of them would have killed me for letting it get exposed. So you decided it was better to let her die than face the consequences, Morrison said flatly. I found the old coal room. It had been sealed off decades ago, but the door was still there. I carried her inside. She was barely breathing. I thought she'd be gone within the hour. But she wasn't, Williams said. She woke up, and she spent days dying in that room. Trying to escape, writing messages, calling for help that never came. I didn't know, Whitmore's voice broke. I swear to God I didn't know she'd survive that long. I called Tom Henderson the next day. Told him I needed the room permanently sealed. Told him it was part of the corruption cover-up, hiding evidence. He thought he was just sealing up documents. I paid him to do the work and keep quiet. You let Sarah Walsh spend 36 years not knowing what happened to her mother. I know what I did. I've tried to make up for it. I've donated millions to libraries, schools, charities. I've tried to do some good. You can't balance wrongdoing with charity, Williams interrupted. You can't seal a woman in a wall, let her die in terror, and then feel better about yourself by writing checks. Whitmore put his head in his hands and wept. His lawyer sat beside him, stone-faced, knowing that her client had just confessed to everything. What happens now? Whitmore finally asked. Now you're going to give us a full statement, Williams said. Every detail, every name of everyone involved in the corruption scheme, every aspect of what happened that night. And then you're going to be extradited to Iowa and charged. The confession took 6 hours. Whitmore provided names, dates, amounts. He described the property purchases, the zoning fraud, the federal funds that had been redirected. He gave them everything. By the time Williams and Morrison boarded their flight back to Cedar Falls, they had enough evidence to pursue charges against multiple people, even those who'd already died. Civil suits could be filed against estates. Restitution could be sought, and most importantly, the truth was finally known. Sarah Walsh was waiting at the police station when they returned. She'd spent the past 2 days in Cedar Falls, staying at a hotel near the library, unable to leave until she knew everything. William sat with her in a private conference room and told her everything Whitmore had confessed. The confrontation, the injury, the terrible decision to seal Margaret in that room, the years of cover-up that followed. Sarah listened without interrupting, tears streaming down her face. When Williams finished, Sarah was quiet for a long time. "Did she suffer?" Sarah finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Williams wanted to lie, wanted to say it was quick and painless, but Sarah deserved the truth. She'd waited 36 years for it. "Yes," Williams said gently. "The medical examiner confirmed that the head injury would have caused significant pain and disorientation, but it wasn't immediately fatal. Your mother would have been conscious, at least intermittently, for several days. The sealed room had no ventilation. Eventually, a combination of dehydration, lack of oxygen, and the head injury." Williams paused. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing this, but she fought. She tried to get out. She left evidence. She did more than that. Your mother made sure we'd know who was responsible. She wrote down names. She documented what she'd found, even dying. She was thinking clearly enough to leave us what we needed to get justice. And the message she wrote to me," Sarah's voice broke, "telling me it wasn't my fault. She knew. Even then, she knew I'd spend my life blaming myself. Your mother loved you very much. That's clear from everything we've learned about her." "I did blame myself," Sarah admitted. "For years, I wondered if I'd called more often, visited more, if I'd stayed in Cedar Falls instead of going away to school. I wondered if somehow my choices had pushed her away, made her want to leave." "She didn't leave you, Sarah. She was taken from you, by corruption and greed, and a man who valued his own interests over human life. What happens to Whitmore now?" "He'll be extradited to Iowa within the week, charged with second-degree murder. His confession is detailed and corroborated by physical evidence. His lawyer will try to negotiate a plea, but given the circumstances, the cover-up, the 36 years of deception, I don't see any prosecutor accepting anything less than life in prison." "Good," Sarah said quietly. "That's good." Over the following weeks, the case exploded across national media. The story had everything. A missing person mystery solved after 36 years, political corruption, a woman sealed behind a wall in a public library. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News all sent camera crews to Cedar Falls. The New York Times ran a front-page feature. True crime podcasts dedicated entire seasons to the case. The Carnegie Public Library became an unwanted tourist attraction. People came from across the country to see the building where Margaret Walsh had died. The city eventually had to install barriers and hire security to manage the crowds. 3 more arrests followed Whitmore's confession. Robert Carlson, who'd been Whitmore's assistant in 1987, had driven Whitmore to the library that night and helped dispose of evidence afterward. Michael Thornton, a police officer who'd been on Whitmore's payroll, had falsified the initial investigation reports when Margaret was reported missing. And David Chen, a city attorney, had helped structure the corrupt property deals and had known about Margaret's death from the beginning. All 3 men were in their 70s now, living quiet, retirements funded by the money they'd made from corruption. All 3 maintained their innocence initially, but faced with Whitmore's detailed confession and the documentary evidence from the briefcase, all eventually accepted plea deals. The trials happened over the course of 14 months. Whitmore pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received life in prison without possibility of parole. He died 8 months into his sentence from a massive heart attack. He was 72 years old. Carlson, Thornton, and Chen received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. All 3 were elderly, and all 3 would likely die in prison. Civil suits followed. Sarah Walsh, representing her mother's estate, sued all 4 men and the estates of the officials who died years earlier, Brennan, Richardson, and Winters. The lawsuit sought compensation not just for Margaret's death, but for the years of anguish Sarah had endured not knowing what had happened to her mother. The settlements and judgments totaled over $40 million. Sarah donated most of it to charity, specifically to organizations that fought government corruption and supported families of missing persons. She kept enough to establish a foundation in her mother's name, the Margaret Walsh Memorial Library Fund, which provided grants to small-town libraries and funded literacy programs. Mom loved libraries, Sarah explained at the fund's launch event. She believed they were sacred spaces where anyone could access knowledge and better themselves. This foundation honors that belief, and it ensures that her death wasn't meaningless, that something good came from this tragedy. The city of Cedar Falls conducted its own investigation into the corruption scheme. Property transactions from the 1980s were reviewed. Illegal profits were identified and seized where possible. The city implemented new oversight measures, new transparency requirements, new protections for whistleblowers. "We failed, Margaret Walsh," the current mayor said at a public hearing. "Our institutions, our officials, our systems, they all failed her. She discovered evidence of corruption, and instead of being protected, she was killed. We can't undo that, but we can make sure it never happens again." The Carnegie Public Library underwent extensive renovations. The basement was completely rebuilt, with new lighting, new ventilation, new safety measures. The sealed room where Margaret died was preserved, but made accessible, transformed into a memorial space. A plaque was installed with Margaret's photograph and a summary of what had happened. The exact words she'd written on that clipboard were inscribed in bronze. "Sarah, I love you. Not your fault. I love you." Below that, another inscription read, "Margaret Ellen Walsh, 1944 to 1987. Librarian, mother, seeker of truth. She discovered corruption and paid the ultimate price. May her courage inspire us to always stand up for what is right, no matter the cost." A new reading room was created on the library's main floor, dedicated to Margaret's memory. The Margaret Walsh Reading Room featured comfortable chairs, excellent lighting, and shelves stocked with books about justice, integrity, and civic responsibility. Students from the University of Northern Iowa often studied there. Children came for story hour. Adults attended book club meetings. The memorial and the reading room became a place of reflection. People would come and sit quietly, thinking about Margaret and what she'd discovered, and the price she'd paid. Teachers brought school groups to learn about civic responsibility and the importance of speaking up when you see wrongdoing. "My mother didn't set out to be a hero," Sarah told one such school group during a visit to Cedar Falls. "She was just doing her job, counting books, taking inventory, and she found something that shouldn't have been there. She could have ignored it, could have put it back and walked away. But that wasn't who she was. She believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous." The anniversary of Margaret's discovery, May 19th, became an annual memorial event in Cedar Falls. The first anniversary, May 19th, 2024, drew hundreds of people. The library held a ceremony. Sarah spoke, as did Detective Williams and the current library director. "We're here today to remember Margaret Walsh," the library director said during the ceremony. "To honor her life, her work, and her courage." Margaret was a librarian for 18 years. She helped thousands of people find the books and information they needed. She created a welcoming space for everyone who walked through these doors, and when she discovered evidence of corruption, she did what she believed was right. She documented it. She tried to report it, and she paid the ultimate price for her integrity. The director paused, looking around at the assembled crowd. But Margaret's story doesn't end with her death. It continues in the reforms that have been implemented, in the memorial that bears her name, in the foundation that supports libraries and literacy, in every person who hears her story and is inspired to stand up for truth, even when it's difficult. Margaret's legacy is one of courage, integrity, and the belief that individual actions matter. After the ceremony, Sarah stood by her mother's memorial plaque for a long time. People approached to offer condolences, to share memories of Margaret, to express support. Sarah thanked each of them, genuinely moved by the community's response. Robert Chen, the electrician who'd found Margaret, attended the ceremony with his family. "Miss Walsh," he said, "I'm Robert Chen. I'm the one who found your mother." Sarah looked at him for a moment, then reached out and hugged him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting your instincts. Thank you for looking behind that wall. Thank you for bringing my mother home." Robert's eyes filled with tears. "I just wish it could have been sooner. I keep thinking, if we'd updated that wiring years ago, if someone had noticed that wall earlier." "You can't think like that," Sarah said gently. "You found her when you found her. That's what matters. After 36 years, you gave me answers. You gave me closure. You gave my mother justice. That's everything." Detective Williams, who'd worked Margaret's case for decades, became a sought-after speaker at law enforcement conferences. She talked about the importance of not giving up on cold cases, of maintaining relationships with victims' families, of being willing to look at old evidence with fresh eyes. "I worked this case for 27 years before we found Margaret," Williams told one audience. 27 years of following leads that went nowhere, of promising Sarah Walsh that we hadn't forgotten her mother. There were times I wanted to give up, times I thought we'd never know what happened, but we kept the file open, kept reviewing evidence. And when Robert Chen called 911 about human remains in a library basement, I responded personally because something told me it might be connected. For Williams, solving Margaret's case was the defining achievement of her career. She retired from the Cedar Falls Police Department 2 years after the discovery, having worked for the department for 29 years. At her retirement party, Sarah Walsh attended as a special guest. "Detective Williams never gave up on my mother," Sarah told the assembled officers and staff. "For 27 years, she kept this case active. She called me regularly with updates, even when there weren't really updates. She made me feel like my mother mattered, like the case mattered. And when my mother was finally found, Detective Williams was there. She handled everything with professionalism and compassion. She got justice for my mother. I will be grateful to her for the rest of my life." As the years passed, Sarah found ways to honor her mother beyond just the foundation and the annual memorial services. She became an advocate for missing persons' families, speaking at conferences and support groups. She lobbied for legislation protecting whistleblowers and strengthening corruption oversight. She volunteered at her local library in Colorado, continuing her mother's legacy of service. "My mother's life was cut short," Sarah said during one advocacy speech, "but her impact continues. Every time someone sees wrongdoing and reports it instead of staying silent, that's honoring my mother. Every time a library helps someone access information or find a book that changes their life, that's honoring my mother. Every time we choose integrity over convenience, truth over comfort, that's honoring my mother." The Carnegie Public Library thrived in the years after Margaret's discovery. Attendance increased. Donations poured in. New programs were launched. The building that had hidden such a dark secret for so long became a symbol of transparency and community resilience. Sarah established a routine of visiting Cedar Falls twice a year, on the anniversary of her mother's discovery in May, and on her mother's birthday in March. She'd spend a few days in town, visiting the memorial, meeting with Detective Williams, connecting with people who remembered Margaret. The corruption case continued to have ripples for years. Several properties involved in the scheme were seized and sold, with proceeds going to the city's general fund. The federal government conducted its own investigation into the officials who'd been bribed to redirect funds. Congressional hearings were held. New oversight measures were implemented. The case also sparked renewed interest in other cold cases involving missing persons. Across the country, police departments began reviewing old files, looking for cases where remains might be hidden in unexpected places. Several long unsolved disappearances were resolved as a result. But for all the policy changes and legal reforms, the most powerful legacy was simpler. The example of one woman's courage. Margaret Walsh had seen evidence of corruption and tried to report it, knowing it would be difficult and potentially dangerous. She documented what she found, even as she died. She'd thought of her daughter and left a message of love and reassurance. That example inspired others. Across the country, people who witnessed wrongdoing in their workplaces or communities found courage to speak up, citing Margaret's story as inspiration. Whistleblowers who faced retaliation drew strength from knowing they weren't alone, that others had paid even higher prices for telling the truth. Sarah looked up at the plaque on the wall, at her mother's photograph, at those final words inscribed in bronze. "Sarah, I love you. Not your fault. I love you." "I love you too, Mom," Sarah whispered. The story of the librarian who disappeared in 1987 and was found in 2023 became one of those cases that transcended true crime fascination and became a cultural touchstone. It was taught in schools, referenced in political debates, cited in ethics discussions. But more than anything, it was a reminder that truth matters, that individuals can make a difference, that corruption must be confronted, that justice, even when delayed for decades, is still worth pursuing, and that love, a mother's love for her daughter, expressed in final words that took 36 years to arrive, transcends even death. Margaret Ellen Walsh, librarian, mother, seeker of truth, died in darkness in October 1987. But her light continued to shine, illuminating the path for others who came after. Her courage inspired courage. Her integrity prompted integrity. Her love fostered love. And in the end, truth found the light, just as it always does, just as it always will.